Hello, everyone. So excited to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us. We'll wait just a minute or two and make sure we've got our full group. Highly recommend if you would like to share your screens, you can do so. I'm really excited to welcome Corbett Doyle here today for this exciting program. And again, we'll just wait a few more minutes and then we'll get started shortly. And if you would like, you can also go ahead and turn your screen to active speaker or speaker view if that's what you would prefer. Given all those recommendations, Corbett, if you have any other recommendations that you would share, feel free to throw those in.
It looks like everyone has mute on, but just make sure you have mute on when you're not talking.
True. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started so that we can start welcoming the group. Happy Thursday and welcome to today's exciting career program, Building an Exclusive Culture in a Hybrid Workplace, brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association and Professor Corbett Doyle. I'm Sarah Whitney Anderson, Assistant Director of Alumni and Student Engagement, and I'm so glad you could be with us today. This program will last around an hour. Feel free to type any questions as you have them in the chat box, and we will make sure that these are addressed in some way before our time is up. We will also be recording today's session, and we will post that later on VU Connect and also share it with you via email should you want that. I am so excited to have our speaker with us today. Corbett Doyle, EDD, is a senior lecturer of leadership and organizational performance at Peabody College, Vanderbilt University. Her particular areas of expertise are diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace. Women's leadership, evidence-based management, strategic workforce planning and analytics, and talent development. Prior to joining Vanderbilt's faculty in 2008, Corbett was the chair of the healthcare industry practice and reported to the CEO as the Global Chief Diversity Officer at Aon PLC. All right, Corbett, I give it to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I love that it's a small group. So rather than wait until the end for formal Q&A, I would love to make this an open conversation. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or a suggestion or a best practice that you would like to contribute to the conversation. And Sarah, I'll ask you to help me keep an eye out for anyone who's used the raise their hand icon or actually has posted in the chat that they want to contribute or has raised their hand physically if their visual is on, just in case I miss it. So I thought this picture, and I don't know exactly where you all are and when the last time you were on campus was, but for quite a while now, every year the incoming class at the Commons creates a human sign that shows the number of, for the class year that they're starting. And I thought this one was particularly appropriate because of social distancing. The students were not able to cluster tightly to create a one. So,
hey, Corbett, quick thing,
yes.
We're not sharing your screen right now, so if you want to quickly do that.
Oh, well, thank you. I forgot that I turned it off when you and I were talking. I had it on and then shut it off. So there's the visual that you couldn't see. And so you can see rather than a human one, we have this photoshopped one in its place. So the focus of what we're going to be talking about today is really what is happening to the workplace as we move out of the absolute social distance mandate in office work settings and shift into something else, and the impact on inclusion as a result of both where we've been and where we're going. So just from a quick standpoint for the agenda, I'll talk briefly about what I mean when I say hybrid and what I mean when I'm talking about inclusion. And then we'll talk about why they matter. we'll talk about where we've been with respect to inclusion and the impact that hybrid may be having on that, positive and negative. We'll talk about what leaders can do to improve the inclusivity of a hybrid workplace. And we'll also talk about what you can each do as individuals in terms of having an impact on inclusivity. And then we're going to have breakout sessions with a question for each of you to talk about. And I do have a few polls that I'm going to be using. So this is the first poll, and I'm going to open up the poll while I give you all a chance to read the questions. All right, so you should all be able to see the Zoom poll if you have computer access. I see a lot of people have visual turned off. I don't know if some of you are on the phone and struggling to participate, but hopefully people can join. All right, so we've got one person who we will all commiserate with, who was 100% in the office and is still 100% in the office. And then we've got quite a mix of people otherwise. So I will quickly share the results of this. And so we've got, you know, the majority working some kind of hybrid schedule. So I'm going to leave that for now, and we will come. I'll share just the results of a recent national survey. So this was conducted a couple of weeks ago, and it was a joint venture between Forbes and SurveyMonkey, and the question was, if you had your choice, what would your workplace setting be going forward? And you can see the majority said a mix of remote and in the office, but a pretty high percentage also said that they would like to always be in the office. And as relevant to this topic, we're going to come back and break these numbers down in a little more detail in a few minutes. So just want to talk first about what I mean by hybrid, in case that's a new term or people have different definitions. But what I'm talking about in terms of a hybrid workplace is some mix of people who are working in person, also called face-to-face, or remote online. And so you can see from the little icon on the right, the complexity associated with what this hybrid workplace looks like. And that is why it's a relevant topic. There are actually, I told Sarah when I was double checking, the topic in the last couple of days, someone published an article like a week ago, literally last week, with the exact same title as this session. So I thought that was a telling sign that it resonates. But it was very difficult for many organizations to go from 100% or virtually 100% in person to 100% remote pretty much overnight. I would suggest that the hybrid workplace is going to be much more complex than either or. There are so many issues. If any of you have ever been on a conference call, like in the old days when we did phone conference calls rather than Zoom conference calls, and everyone else was in the room and you were the one dialing in, you know how hard it was to have your voice heard, how hard it was to hear the other voices at the table. So amplify that when we're talking about all the work that is being done. So it becomes very complex. And then I want to talk just from a definition setting standpoint about inclusion. And so, when I talk about inclusion, and I actually put, I guess I must have eliminated the slide in error that I wanted. So there's diversity and inclusion. And diversity, I think of as like an old-fashioned abacus with all these different color beads, and you can mix them up. And it is really about checking the boxes. Who do I have in each of these boxes at each level of the organization? And sometimes that is referred to as the mix. What is the mix of the workforce? Whereas I think of inclusion, the way I think of a high performing team, everyone on the team brings different skills and abilities. Individually, they're not going to win a game or a tournament, but when you bring that cluster of different skills and abilities together in a cohesive manner, you have high performance. And so, so diversity is sometimes referred to as the mix, inclusion sometimes referred to as making the mix matter. And that's really what we're talking about today. So another recent survey, Red Thread Research, love this organization. It was founded by two women who used to do research for Deloitte, among other organizations, and they are really doing phenomenal research. Much of their work is behind a firewall, but some of it is freely accessible and just really interesting topics. Fairly broad, do a lot of work in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. And so one of the things that they identified from a survey was that three of the top people priorities, or that the top three people priorities that organizations identified during COVID was engagement, inclusion, and then well-being and belonging. And so a lot of people are thinking of inclusion and belonging as the same. And I think this survey makes a great point that belonging and inclusion may go side by side, but they are not necessarily identical. But you can see how important these are. And I think that the well-being and belonging had the highest rating, one, because the physical and psychological impact of COVID resonated across organizational settings, but it also became much more difficult, even for organizations that thought they were doing an effective job at inclusion, realized how complicated this was when everyone wasn't in the same place. And why does inclusion matter? There is really robust research. This is just one example because it's a visual, but there is really robust research linking inclusion and innovation. And if companies thought pre-COVID, companies, industries, sectors thought pre-COVID that they didn't have to be very innovative, I think everyone has learned since March of last year that if you are not innovative, if you are not an agile organization, including longstanding colleges and universities, you will not survive the changes that have already occurred and that we're going to be seeing into the future. So innovation has become critical. The most innovative companies are most inclusive. And it's really easy to understand why when you think about what inclusion means. And so I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the different components of inclusion, and in particular, an inclusive culture. So I love this definition of culture. You know, there are lots of books that have been written in the last 30 years on culture and what it is. And people tend to think about culture as all-encompassing and organization-wide. But you have all, I am sure, been in organizations, or, for those who are recent graduates, and I think we have one current student on the call, everyone has been in different classes where there's teachers you want to be in their class, teachers you don't want to be in. If you're in group projects or if you're in teams at work, there are teams you want to be on and there are teams you don't want to be on. There are managers you want to work for and there are managers nobody wants to work for across organizational settings. And so, culture may be pervasive in an organization, but it's really at the team level and the culture of a team that matters to most of us as individuals. That's the impact that we feel. And this definition, I think, breaks it down into something that we can all identify with. And in particular, the last part, it's not something you being an organization or a team, it's not something you are, it's something you do. And so it is constantly, thinking about and massaging and managing the relationships toward a shared goal. So how do you know what your culture is? Coyle, so he wrote this book, The Culture Code. If you're interested in culture, it is one of the best books I've read on the topic. And he's worked with Southwest Airlines, he works with Navy SEALs, he works with NFL teams. I mean, he works across contexts. So one of the most common and perhaps easiest ways to try and understand what an organization or team's culture is to focus on what behavior gets rewarded or punished. And that sends a very clear message about what behavior the organization is looking to leverage and replicate. When we saw with the Me Too movement, these organizations that had buried and ignored long-time sexual harassment claims because people like Matt Lauer brought in a lot of viewers. And so the behavior that was rewarded was bringing in TV viewers. The behavior that was ignored and not punished was a sexual harasser. Same thing with Weinstein. Second one is, what are the stories that the organization tells to illustrate what it's like to be part of this team? What's it like to work in this organization? Those stories are very, very telling about how the organization views itself, and again, what will end up being rewarded in that organization. And then the third is a reality check. Do our directives, do our communications, do the people that we communicate to in the organization reflect what we say our priorities are? And if there's a disconnect, pay more attention to those directives and communications than to what people say the priorities are. All right, so I'm going to do a second poll before I go just a little further. Let's see. All right. All right, really interesting results. So the positive is that you know, half the people on the call, a little over half, feel very comfortable, whether they were remote or in person, you know, voicing contrary opinions. So that says so much about where you have all chosen to work. That is one of the most positive signs of what I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is psychological safety. And I I love that we've got that, you know, the second highest is people who were not comfortable in the office, but now that they're remote, feel safer voicing those contrary opinions. And that is a key point I ask everyone to keep in mind, that there are advantages for many people in a remote setting of bringing their identity to their workplace. All right. So, critical components of three critical components of an inclusive culture, and this is coming from multiple sources. So I've included all my sources on the slides. I've told Sarah to feel free to share the slides with everyone, and then I have hyperlinks at the end to, this will be no surprise to Anne, but I use a social bookmarking tool called Digo, and I've got links of tons of resources for anyone interested in remote work, hybrid work, and inclusion more generally. So three key components. The first of an inclusive culture. The first is building group psychological safety, and the one of the telltale signs of a psychologically safe group is your comfort in saying something that is controversial or maybe different from what is being currently being done, and feeling comfortable that you will be given the benefit of the doubt for voicing that contrary opinion. That's psychological safety, knowing that you can speak up and share your ideas. And so, you know, I want to reference the earlier conversation about inclusion and innovation. That is why there is such a strong evidence-based link between inclusion and innovation. You cannot have innovation unless you have people bringing forth radically different ideas, out of the box thinking, questioning the way we do things today. If you don't have that, you will not be able to be agile from an innovation standpoint, and you will struggle to be innovative, period. So, critical component. The second one is one that Coyle raised, and Amy Edmondson, who I've quoted here, is kind of the one of the major thinkers. She's a Harvard professor. She is one of the major thinkers in this space of psychological safety. She's been right about it and about teams for 30 plus years. The second point, though, is one that Coyle brought up, and this one really threw me for a loop. So, inclusive cultures need high levels of trust. I had, you know, in my mind, I thought, well, you know, if I'm in a group, I'm not going to make myself vulnerable until I trust you. And if I trust you, then I'm willing to be vulnerable and maybe share those out of the box ideas. Coyle's research suggests that it's the reverse, that vulnerability, in particular, vulnerability from the team leader, must come first. And that opens the door to build trust and trusting relationships. And he has a quote in his book that has really stuck with me. It was from a Navy SEAL team commander who said, "The four most important words any leader can say are, 'I screwed that up.'" That willingness to admit that you made a mistake, or to say, "I don't know how to do this, I need all of your help." That is what allows other people to step up, to share their ideas, to feel like they can really trust you as a leader and one another. And then the third is, shared goals and values, this sense of purpose. And so I'll talk about purpose a couple of times today, but purpose is really becoming the topic of 2021. A lot of research going into this space. It is not a new topic, but has really gained traction. And last year, the Business Roundtable, which is the largest CEOs of the largest 100 organizations, identified purpose as important as profits. So purpose and profits. And so I think we will continue to see far more of this. Coyle characterized purpose as having shared goals and values. Aaron Hurst, he wrote the book, The Purpose Economy, I think is the name of the book, and founded Taproot, which is a volunteer organization that some of you may have worked with. It's a way to volunteer your time and talents rather than just your money. He identifies a third piece, and that is the sense of knowing that you're having an impact on something that matters to you, that's purpose. So bringing us back to hybrid workplace, this was a quote from a remote survey that PwC did last year. If everyone can work from home, what's the point of having an office? Why do we need an office? And some organizations are now deciding, well, maybe we don't need the office. We figured out how to do this remotely. We can do it remote. Great book that I read last year, written by the founders of Buzzcamp tech company. They are 100% remote. They've always been 100% remote. And the title of the book is Work Doesn't Have to, Why Work Doesn't Have to Be Crazy, I think is the title. And they have an office. They hire people remotely. They have an office in a couple of cities. They're small offices. That's where you go if you need a quiet place to work, much like the library. So rather than the office being the place to collaborate, their office is the place for quiet work. And so there's really an opportunity to rethink why we have an office and what it's for. This was another survey that was done last year on what employees identified as the top pluses and minuses, or pros and cons of remote work. No surprise that the biggest benefits were flexibility, and for many of us, the commute. But the downsides, tied, difficulty collaborating and communicating, and then just a sense of loneliness. And I think after a year of COVID, many of us get the loneliness in spades. It's like, okay, I want to see someone other than my dog, who I locked on the other side of this door so that he wouldn't join the call today. But we are all feeling that, along with trouble unplugging from work. It's hard to find the boundaries, but I really want to focus on the collaboration, communication, and loneliness. And so from a leadership standpoint, key skills in this hybrid workplace, where it's going to become more complicated than it was in a remote workplace, is, managers, we need to train managers to be more empathetic and to balance empathy and productivity, rather than focus just on productivity. Listening skills are far more critical than ever. They will be incredibly critical in a hybrid workplace. And then communication, collaboration, and connection. So I'm going to talk about each of these in a little more detail. Whoops. And so balancing, that empathy, checking in with employees. I think many team leaders and organizational leaders, some for the first time ever, have come to acknowledge people's personal lives. Many have seen those lives in the Zoom background. They'll hear noise in the background. I know with, one of my colleagues, when we have like faculty meetings, it is, she's a young professor. She and her husband are both working from home. They have one home office. They're both working in the office, and they have young children who weren't in school for much of the time. And her husband talks in a fairly loud voice. And so she'll be on this, Zoom call with her headphones on, trying to speak. And you can hear her husband in the background, and everybody's like, could you just tone it down and let her talk, But that's the reality. And so leaders are seeing that and coming to appreciate the human side of their team members in a way that they haven't before. And we really need to balance those, because it's going to be very difficult to achieve high levels of productivity without recognizing that going forward. All right, so listening frequently is critical. One of the tools that cutting edge organizations are rolling out in spades are called pulse surveys. So rather than this one big monolithic once a year employee engagement survey that takes you half an hour to complete and you give up halfway through, they are sending these, quick surveys, often via a phone or on your computer, that's just a couple of questions, and it isn't everyone in the workforce. It's sampling different people in the workforce, but it's providing ongoing input on how things are going. So it's really important to establish social support and connections, more complicated in a hybrid environment. And so, but it is critical for people who are not working in the dominant modality to know that they can count on their coworkers. So I'll talk a little closer to the end about some specific ideas, but resources and support both in and outside of work. And so, do people have time to care for their family? Do they have the tools that they need to care for their family? There is this need and value associated with recognizing that your team members have a whole life, and it's not just a work life. The psychological safety components, so really trying to understand and ask questions in pulse surveys. Do people feel comfortable speaking up? So I would say that the pulse, the poll results of this group are not characteristic of the majority. They're wonderful, but they're not characteristic of the majority. And then invite ideas, allow people to share their ideas and their thoughts. One organization is doing monthly pitch ideas, and I love this. And they change the theme every month, but employees can join the call and, depending on what the theme is, they can pitch a suggestion, they can pitch an idea, they can pitch a problem, but it gives people an opportunity to share what, their thoughts, their ideas, and I thought it was a very creative way to open the door for people to do that. And having a theme, I thought, was a great way to do it. One of the caveats about listening frequently, in particular, if you're asking employees for input, and I got this from a company that is growing rapidly, that's headquartered in Nashville, and I have a group of students who are doing an independent study with this organization on employee engagement. What have we learned about employee engagement during times of crisis? And one of the things that this company talked about was the need to, and they're doing pulse surveys, but they talked about the importance of avoiding inaction fatigue, that employees are going to stop telling you what they think if you never share the results and you never tell them what you're doing about what you've learned. So if you're going to listen, do something what you hear and make sure people know what that something is. And then I love this. I have included a link. This company is called Life Labs, and they made public their remote work playbook. And it's really detailed. Doesn't take a long time to read, but has a robust table of contents and lots of ideas. The link will take you to that. But they also have a remote work skills test, and it's focused on communication, connection, and then self-management. And so great tools for yourself if you're a team leader, and for yourself as an individual to see how well you are doing in these critical areas. And then the last one, for team leaders, just some specifics on communication, collaboration, and connection. Because it's more complex in the hybrid environment, think about periodic check-ins. And I'm not talking about pulse surveys. I'm talking about, giving people a chance to let you know how they're doing. If you're having a Zoom meeting, don't start with business. Give people a chance. I do this. I teach in we have an online doctoral program. And so these are all working professionals. And since COVID, I started doing check-ins at the beginning of each class. And what they've kind of evolved to is, we spend a couple of minutes at the beginning of class. Does anyone have anything positive they want to share, or anything that they need a shoulder to cry on about and that they just need to get out? And it has changed the dynamic of the entire course, let alone each evening. But give people, in whatever kind of work setting you have, that opportunity to let you know how things are going. Think beyond all day long Zoom meetings. I have heard a couple of stories that make me cringe about employees who are spending 6-7 hours every day, all day, in Zoom meetings. We are no longer all in the same place. In most of our workplace settings, we are never again going to all be in the same place all the time. Nobody's going to get anything done if everybody is tied up in Zoom meetings. And so, think about alternatives. So think about, the value of small informal meetings. Leaders in particular, just have a, coffee meeting with a couple of people. One organization shared with me that what they've been doing since COVID is they set up these periodic meetings with 2 leaders and a half a dozen employees, each employee from a different part of the organization, and they do an informal Zoom meeting. The employees get to know one another, so they're building networks across the organization, and they're building time talking to leaders from different parts of the organization. Think about multiple modalities. It doesn't have to be Zoom or Team. One of my favorites, I did this with a colleague yesterday. We were supposed to have a Zoom meeting, and I said, how about a phone call while we each walk in our own neighborhood? And so that's what we did. We both got out. It was gorgeous, and we talked on the phone. Oh, yeah, phone, right. We can do that. We don't have to see one another. And then from a communication standpoint, enough with the emails. And nobody can keep up with the volume of emails since COVID started. No one can keep up with the invitations to webinars and to massive events. So from an organizational standpoint, think about pull strategies. Posting information in a place where you encourage people to visit, but they can go when they're ready and when they're ready to absorb information and see what they need to. And you save push for critical, time-sensitive information. Zoom fatigue is real. And then help remote workers build networks. And it's really important to embed this in the onboarding process. If you are onboarding remote employees, make sure you are helping them build networks, not just on the team, but also across the organization. So find ways to make those introductions and to build that. One of my favorite tools, Aaron Hurst, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote the Purpose Economy, is the founder of a new company called Imperative.com. It is a peer coaching company. And the whole point is to help people feel more connected, to build that sense of network and purpose to something bigger than themselves by helping develop relationships where they are helping one another be more effective and, live out their dreams. And then don't forget about the importance of humor. Needs to be appropriate humor. And one of the best ways is to laugh at yourself. Do not make jokes at the expense of anybody else. And then really important, I'm going to take us back to the survey that we started with. One size, one solution is not inclusive, and it is no longer sufficient post-COVID. We cannot go back to one size fits all. So I had that survey about, people's preferences, if you had a choice about where you'd work. And I just want to point out that this, orange bar, look who's above the bar in terms of who prefers hybrid. So, men are far more likely to prefer going back to the office, and no one else reaches that level. And so women and people of color are much more likely to say they would like a hybrid opportunity, the ability to choose when they're going to the office and how often they're going to the office and how often they are working from home. So that is an important component of inclusion, choice and flexibility if you want to foster inclusivity. And just for anybody who's trying to read the survey, I think Sarah's already posted the slide, so you can go back and take a look at it. And I've included the link to the original survey, although I did create that graph. I didn't like their graphs were too complicated. So, people have different needs for different reasons, different types of physical abilities, that working remote simplifies many issues. People who aren't comfortable making certain aspects of their ability or a source of disability visible now have a choice. They're not constantly fighting who's going to figure it out. Working parents, ongoing struggle for working parents, particularly those who have long commutes. And then, something that, we've really been trying to address, there are many people who have a fear of physical safety. I mean, we had an issue in Nashville with an Asian student in Nashville who had a physical incident because of their heritage. It didn't happen on campus, but it happened in Nashville. And so, many people post George Floyd have just a heightened sense of insecurity about being in certain places at certain times of day. And if we are going to be inclusive, we are going to recognize that people are going to have different needs, and they're going to have different needs on different days. So, just kind of takeaways, think about choice and flexibility in terms of where and when people work. Think about async. So that's on your own time versus synchronous. Everybody's doing it all together. Options. A phrase. So I've included lots of web links that this came from, but one that I loved, and it's included in those links, nonlinear workdays. And really interesting ideas about how to think about. I've long been a proponent of allowing working parents to have flexible work hours. Let them leave at 3 o'clock, pick up their kids, have dinner with them. And if you've got a global responsibilities, let them log back on at 10 o'clock at night when, Asia's starting their workday, and help you improve your effectiveness and flexibility as an organization by allowing that choice for your employees. Another big one that's growing rapidly is this need to be very transparent about career paths and development options. So create a learning organization where people know what it takes to move to a different path or to move up in the path they're in, and give them on-demand options for building those skills. And then purpose, I talked about already. And then just what you can do from an individual standpoint. Lots of talk about allyship, but another way to think about allyship is using your privilege to help other people. So if you feel privileged for whatever reasons, close connection with the leaders, your identity, being a longstanding employee who knows how things work, how can you use that privilege to help other people? And from an inclusion standpoint, one of the easiest is someone tells a joke that is not funny. It's a joke at the expense of other people. Stop them. Tell them you don't find it funny and you think it's offensive. Don't make the person who might be the butt of that joke be the one who has to say something. Notice who is missing from a meeting, who's missing from a decision, or whose voice hasn't been heard, and be encouraging of people to speak up, be encouraging of leaders to call on those people. This is a situation that women, and in particular women of color, identify as a problem. They say something, nobody hears them, and 5 minutes later, Bob says the same thing, and everyone's like, "Oh man, Bob, that is such a fantastic idea." When that happens, notice it, and then amplify the person who came up with the original idea. Say, "Oh, Bob, I'm so glad you like that idea. I thought the same thing when Sarah talked about it." So bring it back to the original source of the idea. And then be curious in a positive way about other cultures, about new colleagues. Reach out to them, get to know them. And this is one of the big things. Do not put the burden on people of color to enlighten you or your organization about how they might be feeling during the times of social justice awakening. And so it's not their job to teach us what we need to know. And many people of color that I have one-on-one conversations with share this as a major source of burden that they are currently struggling with. All right, so quick poll, and we're probably going to not have time for breakouts, but I want to do this poll. I'm going to open it up.
And Corbett, we just had a great question if you wanted to address it while people are answering their poll that has to do with your last slide. And the question is, do you have any suggestions for inclusion for different age groups? I work at a place where I'm significantly older than the rest of my employees and curious if you have any advice along these lines.
Okay, all right. I will let people finish this so they don't lose their train of thought. That is a great question. All right, so I think everybody's responded. So one of my last slides, so far and away, transparency is the number one topic. And, one of the big sources of transparency that has weighed heavy on everyone is, how's our organization doing? Are we secure? Is my job secure? Is my future secure? What decisions are you making about remote work going forward? So it is really important for organizations to do that. But the path to promotion is a big one. Organizations bury that information. They do not make it easy, number one, for employees to understand how they can get promoted or what their alternatives are, how to build the skills to do that. There are tremendous opportunities for that to change, and cutting edge organizations like Unilever. If it's a topic you're interested in, the podcast Learning is the New Working highlights organizations that are really cutting edge in this space. And the other podcast is Digital HR Leaders. Both are really highlighting organizations that are doing a fabulous job of enabling, putting the control back in employees' hands to build the skills they need and to understand what their options are, but it includes a lot of transparency. And then my favorite on Equity Met right now, and I have a slide at the end, Netflix just published their first ever inclusion report, and they've been on this journey since 2013, they've made some of the best progress I've seen anywhere. But one of the things they've done is the top 1,000 managers in the organization have complete transparency about pay for everyone in the organization, so that they can see where they have been falling behind in terms of pay equity. And so it is this nudge approach to enabling managers and encouraging managers to be more equitable in compensation. And in terms of the question about age demographics, so there are organizations where it is particularly problematic, and I don't think that there are going to be easy solutions. And I think part of the question was that you might be an only in terms of being a more experienced employee in the workplace setting. One of the strategies that I have seen most effective, but it hasn't involved an only, and onlys are always difficult, more difficult than any other setting, because it's hard to have your voice heard unless you happen to be the CEO or president or whatever. But it is reverse mentoring, and it is part of this, building skills and competencies in the organization, and helping, pairing people of different age groups to learn from one another. There are so many skills that we can each learn from one another. Another one that I love is creating an environment where everyone has the opportunity to learn the new skills that are needed to advance and to develop. And what some so I think it was Unilever recently launched a talent management bank that is a project bank. People post projects in the organization that they need workers to address. And if you have the skills or you want to acquire the skills, you can volunteer to work on the project and build the skills in an applied setting. Unilever rolled it out at the beginning of COVID because they had businesses that basically went from 100 miles an hour to zero, like businesses that served restaurants. And then others, like grocery stores, ramped up dramatically. And so they allowed employees to work on projects in parts of the company that were really trying to solve problems. But creating opportunities, regardless of age, to build skills, I think is one of the most valuable things that organizations can do to overcome the stigma of age differences in the workforce. And if your workplace isn't willing to do that, I encourage people to do it on their own. There are so many great tools online now for building an array of skills. I had socially distant cocktails with two friends of mine last night who are my age, and we're all over 60, and we are all very comfortable with technology. The two of them, the two people I was with, both spent most of their careers in technology, high-tech companies. They both started with IBM and worked for many other tech companies. They're very comfortable with tech, but one of them was saying, I should start a business. She's like, I can't believe how many of my peers aren't comfortable with technology. I need to start a business helping people my age become more comfortable with technology. So we need to do more of that. And then I see a question, what resources do you have for inclusive recruitment? So that is a long topic. I have bookmarked, I shared at the end of the slides, and you have access to them. I have a tag for inclusion. I have a tag also for recruiting, but some of the best practices for recruiting are, the obvious one is you change the sources where you were recruiting from, but then you have to change the process for making decisions about who gets an interview and how you conduct the interviews. And there are some really great resources. There's a book by Iris, spelled like Iris, like the flower, but pronounced Iris Bonet, B-O-H-N-E-T. She's at Harvard's Kennedy School, wrote a great book on equality by design. And it goes through a lot of really effective strategies for changing the processes so that you are improving the diversity of the outcomes. And I don't really need to talk about anything else that I had. You know, the one caveat is companies need to not go overboard with trying to monitor everything employees are doing in a remote workplace, because that will destroy trust. So what I'd like to do in the few minutes left, I had wanted to do breakout sessions, but I'd really just like to open it up for conversation. Questions, comments, ideas, things you've seen work. Everyone's quiet.
I will say, I think it's really positive to see that a lot of people on our call today and in your poll, that they feel more comfortable when going from home talking to their boss about different things. I did not expect that to be the outcome, and that is very positive to me.
Yes, absolutely, Sarah. It surprised me as well. And I see a question that was posted about anti-racist tactics. And so I would say that anti-racism, it really, we need an absolute robust strategy to tackle anti-racism, because it is so embedded in, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but it's just the reality. I mean, if you're struggling to believe that structural racism is an issue, read the book, The Color of Law, which is really an historical analysis of laws in this country. And you will appreciate the issues in a way that perhaps you weren't aware of before. So I wish I had an easy answer, I think. But it is not an easy answer. It does start with awareness, and a commitment to understanding how racism has impacted what we see in the workplace and what we don't see in the workplace, and then taking conscious steps to dismantle it. Let's see. Oh, Maria Elena, that's fabulous. So Maria Elena posted that she's offered the small group chats and that it seems to have resonated with employees. I love that. And I'm trying to read these. So feel free to add anything to that, Maria Elena, you know, so while I read some of these other comments. Oh, I love this, Ruth. You know, working meetings, you know, that are really, you know, where people can bring a project or a task to the meeting and end on action items. So I think that rather than these like open-ended meetings where nothing is resolved, that notion of leaving the meeting with, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is what you're going to do, this is when we're going to reconvene, is really powerful. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, if we're not out of time, I think I really appreciate this. I'm an HR director for a small graduate school in Seattle, and I feel like I've done a bunch of these things. We've done some of these things well over the last year. The place where I keep hearing people feel the most loss is the hallway conversations, the informal connections in the kitchen, things that you maybe didn't even know about and are having a hard time getting that communication because of things you might have actually caught organically that just is not available to us anymore. And the idea of even going back to the hybrid, I'm trying to like, how do I build something that might fill that loss? I don't know.
So, and that is, that transparency of communication. So, people becoming much more conscious about the need to share, rather than people have to discover information that they need, find vehicles for sharing that, so that everyone has access to it, rather than just the people who manage to figure it out. The informal conversations, but planned informal conversations. So not leaving it to chance, but literally, think about, okay, who are all the people, and then rotate through to make sure that different clusters of people are having these informal meetings where conversations that people may not be thinking about a need to share officially information, it's still that unofficial. And if you're bringing a different group of people together and creating strategies for conversation, they are more likely to come up in those informal, coffee meetings, where you start with something else. You don't necessarily start with work, but you enable a more organic conversation, which is the value of the water cooler conversations. They're organic. And so they can't be completely organic. There needs to be some effort and planning, but you can still do it. And that is what organizations who are saying that they've overcome this, what they're finding. And I would consider on hybrid pairing people, like peer mentoring, one person in the office, one remote, so that there is an ongoing sense of connection.
Cartha, one of the things that we've done is we have a Slack coffee channel where people can pop in throughout the day and have informal conversations. And then we have them in different groups. So like my department has a group, other random like office specific channels have groups, and someone will just say, hey, does anybody want to grab coffee for 5 to 10 minutes? And then people will chat there.
I love that. And I think that is great, particularly that spontaneity of it. So, and people are using it actively. So like it's happening. So
yeah, still using it.
Great suggestion.
It was really active, back in March, but we still, it's probably once or twice a week that I hop in a coffee chat.
I love it.
Thank you.
And I see lots of other posts here. Oh yeah, so the employees that are fresh out of school is a big one. That onboarding is really critical. And if everyone's not remote, I would really encourage you doing a onboarding mentor, which some organizations have used for years, but I think is particularly valuable in this kind of environment. And I would also encourage you to look at that LifeWorks handbook that I talked about, because they've got an onboarding section on there. And I think they've got some good ideas in there, and it's all for remote workers. But I think having those peer connections and having multiple connections is a key way to establish that psychological safety. They will probably get to know their immediate team members, but help them build a network outside of the immediate team as well. And then Mahir, you've got a long post here. I just want to make sure you have a chance to say something about your post.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak. So I was just responding back to Ms. Zhang's comment about what an individual can do when they're experiencing any form of anti-racism, let's say, for instance, in any institution. I'm an employment discrimination attorney. I'm based in New York City, and a lot of my content that I put out on social media is about ways in which individuals can empower themselves when they're dealing with the systemic issues that exist within various institutions. And so I think one of the most important things that an individual can do is to learn how they can speak up, understanding the law, how it pertains to them, and what is the mechanism that they can actually do, like what can they do to protect their voice in raising issues that make them feel like they're not being treated fairly. So I always advocate, listen, document a complaint to your human resource department, somebody who's above you. If you're in a larger institution, small institution, doesn't matter. Make sure that you always document your complaint, specifying the type of discrimination that you're experiencing. Retain a copy of that complaint. And then at that point, you allow the employer, you allow the institution to try to rectify it, try to resolve it, try to make changes. And if they fail to, then they're ultimately catering to a legal claim against themselves, which if you actually hold them to a written paper trail, they're unlikely to hurt themselves when they know that the individual has done something to develop a record in an effort to try to correct the problems that that individual is experiencing. So I just wanted to bring that up.
And that is a great point, because there's an old adage in the liability space: if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And so, yeah. Sarah, I will turn it over to you too.
Thank you. I think that this was a wonderful conversation to end on. So thank you so much, Corbett. Thank you to everyone who stayed on.
Thank you, everybody.
I was a little late in sending the survey, so I'll make sure to catch those who had to leave on the hour. But Corbett, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful knowledge. I can't tell you the amount of notes that I just took and I'm excited to take back to my own office, and I work at Vanderbilt. So I'm excited to make sure that our work is reflecting these same ideas, making sure that my own team feels heard and cared for. I just dropped the feedback link. Would love for you all to share what you thought of today so that we can continue to improve our offerings and make sure we're providing different career programs that you enjoy. I also want you all to check out all of our other career resources on VU Connect, both electronic and those that might be coming in person one day. But I'm just so thankful for you all coming out this afternoon. I hope that you have a wonderful day. And if I can do anything to support you all, please don't hesitate to ask. Have a wonderful day.